I got an email for tonight's true scary story about a house in the Appalachian Mountains, and it is, let me just tell you, do not watch this at night. By the way, happy Easter. Yes, I love you guys this much. I am telling you a true scary story on Easter. I really need you guys to protect yourself before and after my videos, because I'm starting to get messages from people saying that after they're watching my stories, they are either getting sleep paralysis or crazy things are happening to them. So please, when I tell you to protect yourself, I really truly mean that. But tonight's submitter's name is Tangina, and she did say that I could tag her, so she will be tagged in the description if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, and she does want suggestions. All of these stories take place at her cousin's house in West Virginia, where her aunt, her grandmother, and her cousin all live in one house together. It says that these stories take place in chronological order, and they only get scarier as they go on, and she is not lying about that. The first story takes place in 2018 when her grandmother was upstairs in her bed sleeping. Now, her aunt and her grandmother sleep in the same bedroom because her grandmother is elderly and needs help throughout the night. Her aunt was downstairs in the kitchen cleaning up, getting ready for bed, when before she could even get up there, she hears this loud bang! So of course she gets super worried and she runs upstairs because it's coming from her bedroom that she shares with her mom. So she gets up there and her mom is holding her head in pain, and she asks what happened, and she says that some invisible force that she could not see took her head and smashed it against the wall. This terrified her grandmother so much that she is absolutely terrified to be alone. She refuses to be alone. Also, because of this incident, and also because she's elderly and she can't really walk down the stairs, she decided that she was going to move her room downstairs because she did not want to be in that room anymore. Angina said that even if her grandmother to this day is left alone for a second, she starts to panic. Poor lady, I feel so bad. The next incident takes place in 2020 during the pandemic. At this time, her younger sister and her younger brother were staying at her aunt's place because her parents were out of the country. At the time, all three of her older cousins that lived in the house or were at the house all worked, and her younger cousin, which was the same age as her younger brother, didn't have school because of the pandemic. Her aunt and grandmother were also home too, especially because her grandmother wasn't able to go up the stairs anymore due to old age. Because it was COVID and there was nothing to do, her aunt decides that she's going to take her cousin and her little brother out for a walk. Meanwhile, the eldest cousin and his wife went to go pick up the older cousin, which is the eldest cousin's little brother, from work. So at this point, the only people in the house are her little sister and her grandmother, but her little sister doesn't know that those are the only people in the house. She thinks that the cousins are still in the home. She went upstairs to go look for them. She checks all the room and nobody is there, but then she went to go to the oldest cousin's, who was at work room, and she gets there and she sees him. He's sitting in front of the TV, sitting at the bed, just staring at the TV, and the only light in the room was reflected off of the TV, shining onto him, and he's just staring at the TV. It was completely dark in the room, and her sister couldn't see his face clearly, just like a dark shadow sitting in the room. And also, remember, this cousin is at work. Then all of a sudden she hears him say, "Come here." And she's like, "No, what do you want?" And he says, "Come inside my room." At this point, she starts to get a bad feeling, and she's like, "I'm not going in there." So she's like, "I'm gonna go downstairs and go see where my family is." So she goes downstairs and she goes to open the front door. When she checked, she saw Tangina, her eldest cousin, her cousin's wife, and then the cousin that she had just seen up in the room coming out of the car. This terrified her. She was in absolute shock. She was a mess because she told them, she's like, "I just saw him upstairs and he was telling me to come inside of his room." So she goes up to the cousin that she had just seen upstairs and she says, like, "Listen, this is what just happened. I just saw you in your room and you were telling me to come sit next to you." And he was like, "I have not been here since this morning. I've been at work." Being a tiny little girl like that and experiencing that, I would be petrified. So a couple of years later, her cousin was actually going through a rough period. He would often go and smoke in the woods. And remember, he lives in the Appalachian Mountains, so it's very forest dense. He would also drink a lot during this time. Now, it was late at night and her cousin and his wife, the same cousin who's drinking a lot's older brother and his wife, are sleeping in their room together. They always lock their door before they go to sleep, but her cousin's wife wakes up at 3 a.m. in the morning and she sees something. She sees somebody walking in circles around her bed. She could barely see anything because it was so dark and the only light was coming from the Wi-Fi router, but what she did notice is that whatever this was looked exactly like her husband's little brother, the cousin who was drinking a lot in the woods and smoking. He had long hair at this time, and she saw that it was covering his face, and he was shaking his head back and forth, and he was walking from the foot of the bed back, from the foot of the bed back. He just kept doing this. She was absolutely terrified, so she tried waking her husband up. He would not wake up. So she starts taking her nails and she's digging them into his skin. He finally wakes up. So she tells him, "Your little brother was just in our room." And he's like, "That's impossible. We always lock the door." And he gets up and he goes and looks, and the door is in fact locked. So he just tells her, "Listen, we'll talk about this in the morning." So they get up the next morning and they go downstairs and they ask the younger brother, "Listen, were you in our room last night?" And he's like, "No, I wasn't even home last night." They believe that something followed him back from the woods. And also they believe in their religion that if you get intoxicated, you are more susceptible to these types of things. And that's why they don't do that. He is the only one in the family who does this, who smokes or drinks out of the entire family. They've had 2 experiences of seeing shadow people that look exactly like him that were not him. So they want to know what you guys think this is. So a little while later, her eldest cousin is coming home from work, and he's coming home from work late. It's around 3 a.m. and he's absolutely starving. So he goes downstairs in the basement to get food because they kept fridges down in the basement. There was like 2 of them because there were so many people in the house. He's a tall guy, so he was hunched over looking into the fridge when all of a sudden he feels like somebody is watching him. He just gets this overwhelming feeling of just dread. Then he slowly looks behind him. And this is when he sees it. A girl standing in front of him with long dark hair, wearing a white dress. She's a younger girl. Her mouth is gaping open. Her eyes are rolled in the back of her head, and she's just shaking her head violently, back and forth, back and forth. He ran up those stairs so fast, and he would not go down in the basement for a long time. So this is actually the short version of this story. So put 2 and 2 together. Now, what do you guys think about this story? Because I'm telling you right now, if that last thing happened to me, I would lose my ever-loving mind. I would never step foot in that house ever again, I swear. Honestly, if any of these things happened to me, which I mean, they've come close. I've experienced things before that have made me move out of houses before. Well, one house in particular. Do you guys think this is the same entity that is doing all of it? Like, do you think it's all one entity, or do you think it's different entities? And do you think that it's the cousin bringing stuff home from the woods? Because that's very plausible. Tangina and her family would really like to know what you think. So just drop any suggestions or comments or anything that you have below. Maybe even we could tell them some things that they could do to get rid of this. Appalachian Mountains, they make me curious. Really, they do. And I kind of want to go visit them. But at the same time, like, I would always be afraid of bringing something home with me. I swear, the Appalachian Mountains are just... I also don't know what means, but that's just me telling you I'm scared. Like I said, Tangina will be in the comments, you guys, so any questions you have for her, also drop them there. Out of my favorite part, the shout outs. The first shout out is going to Lacey. Lacey, you emailed me your true scary story, and you said that you have been watching my content for a long time and you absolutely love it, and that means everything to me. You have no idea. Thank you so much for being such a supporter. It means the whole world to me when people support me like this. You have no idea. So thank you so much, Lacey. I love you for that, girl. Second one is going to Clinchair34. You're commenting on my videos a lot, and I appreciate you so much, and you're always so sweet. Like, you watch till the end, I know you do, because you commented on my pants, and I appreciate that so much. Like, thank you for supporting my videos all the way to the end. It means the whole world to me. I love you for that. I don't know what you guys are doing this summer, but I will be living in this workout outfit, okay? Look at the back of it. Like, are you freaking kidding me right now? She does not look like that, first of all. Second of all, it has padding, so it's super supportive for the girls. It's buttery soft and form-fitting. I am obsessed with it. It's from Yo Rio. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I will drop the link for you below because, oh my gosh, and it comes in different colors. Like, girl, you know, you already know. Link for these will literally be right there. And also, you guys, if you stay till the end, you know I absolutely love you for that. I just need you to do 3 things for me. And what are those? Have a safe night. What's the second one? Keep sending me your scary stories. And the third one is what? Say it with me. Have a spooky night.
I don't know about you guys, but to me, this sounds like a time slip. I was a patrol officer working the overnight shift when dispatch sent me to a welfare check. A woman had called 911 saying she'd seen a little girl standing alone at the edge of the woods just outside town. By the time I got there, the caller was gone, but dispatch confirmed they'd spoken to her. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the tree line. About 30 yards in, I saw her. She couldn't have been older than 8. She was wearing an old white dress and standing perfectly still with her back to me. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" She never answered. My radio crackled. Dispatch said, "Unit 12, where are you?" I told them I was with the little girl. There was a long pause. Then the dispatch said, "Officer, that's impossible. Your GPS hasn't moved. You're still sitting in your patrol car." My stomach dropped. I looked back toward the road. My cruiser was exactly where I'd parked it, but it looked impossibly far away. When I turned back toward the little girl, she was gone. Instead, something much taller was standing between the trees. I couldn't make out its face. Just 2 pale eyes reflecting my flashlight. I ran. When I finally reached my cruiser, dispatch asked why I never got out of the vehicle. To this day, I have no idea what happened in those woods, but I transferred districts the following month because I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I saw was waiting for me to come back.
I got an email from this girl who said that her and her friends went to the Appalachian Mountains and one of her friends was literally knocked unconscious by some creature. So we're going to call this girl Kelsey for the story. So when Kelsey was around 15, 16 years old, her and her two friends, we're going to call them Chloe and Lacey, decided that they wanted to go to Kelsey's late grandparents' cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. None of them had driver's license at this time, and so her mom, Kelsey's mom, had to drop them off. And the only thing that Kelsey's mom said when she dropped them off is, don't go into the forest at night. She did not tell them about the rules at all. They did not know about the rules at all whatsoever. That's important to know. Now, she said that when they got into the cabin, they set their stuff down, and the only thing that they did do right is they locked the door. They left the windows unlocked and they didn't close the curtains. It starts to get dark outside after they've put all their stuff away, so they decide that they're going to go into the living room and they're going to watch a couple of movies. They're sitting there enjoying the movie when suddenly they hear tap, tap, tap on the window. They all kind of look at each other like, why? What is that? So Chloe decides that she's going to get up and she's going to go over and open the curtain and see what's outside tapping on the window. So she does that, but she doesn't see anything. As she's walking back, though, she did say that she had kind of a weird feeling in her stomach. After she sits back down, they resume the movie and they're just chilling when tap, tap, tap. Again, someone is knocking on the window. So Chloe gets up again. She checks the window again. Still nothing. She walks over. She sits back down. They resume the movie again. And then tap, tap, tap. Really loud on the window this time. This time, Lacey stands up. And Lacey is super annoyed at this point. So she goes over. She thinks that someone is messing with them. She opens the curtains. And as soon as she opens those curtains, she falls to the ground and starts screaming. Kelsey said that to this day, Lacey still will not talk about what she saw at that window. And the crazy thing was is that they stayed there for a week, and this was only the first day. Well, the next day, Lacey is just traumatized at this point. And so she is like, I'm not leaving this house. I don't want to go anywhere. She won't talk about what she saw, nothing. And so Chloe and Kelsey decide that they're going to go on a hike in the mountains. So they go on a hike for a little bit. They're out there for about an hour when suddenly Chloe starts to feel sick, like very sick, and she has to sit down. As Chloe is sitting down, just kind of trying to make herself feel better, Kelsey said that she had this innate feeling that something was watching them. So Kelsey tells Chloe, like, I think we need to go. I feel like someone is watching us. And so they get up and they go back home. The only thing is when they walk through the door, Lacey is not home. She is not there. They check all the rooms. She's not there. They call her 7 times. They called her and she is not answering her phone. They don't really know what to do at this point. They're getting a little worried when Lacey suddenly walks through the door. And Kelsey said that when Lacey walked through the door after that, like that entire night, she was acting really odd. Like she wasn't acting like herself. So they all decide that they are going to go to bed, but not before locking all the windows, closing the curtains, and locking the door. Well, Kelsey goes into her room, she gets ready for bed, and she falls asleep. She wakes up at 5 a.m. because she hears tiles creaking, like someone is walking on the tiles outside of her door. She just kind of calls out, "Girls?" Silence. Nothing. So she gets up and she walks into their rooms. She walks into Lacey's room. Lacey's not in her room. She walks into Chloe's room. Chloe's not in her room. Suddenly, tap, 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 coming from the bathroom window, which is the only one without curtains. So bravely, Kelsey decides that she's going to walk over and check that window. And she goes over and checks and nothing is there. She thinks that maybe she was just hearing something. And so she decides to brush this off and go to bed. So she goes to bed and she wakes up the next morning and she walks outside of the room and she asks Chloe and Lacey, like, did you guys get up last night? And Lacey's like, nope. And Chloe's like, no, I thought that was you guys. Kelsey was a little confused about why she didn't see them in their beds, but I guess she kind of kept this to herself. She didn't really say anything about that. So that day was pretty uneventful. But later on that night, Chloe suggests that they go outside when it gets dark to watch the stars. This was the worst idea ever. She says that as they were watching the stars, they're laying on the grass and they're just looking up at the sky and they're admiring how beautiful the stars are in the mountains because they live in the city and they are not the same in the city. And I can attest to that. So they're just chatting, looking at the stars when suddenly they hear this like creaking noise. It sounds like someone is stepping on a stick. Now, they look behind them and they don't see anything. So they kind of just brush this off. They lay back down again. They're looking up at the stars and now they're like counting the stars. And as soon as they're counting the stars, all of a sudden Lacey jumps up and she starts screaming. And she's like, something just grabbed my hair. Something just grabbed my hair. Now, Chloe and Casey are like, what do you mean something grabbed your hair? Like, are you okay? They're trying to comfort her at this point. And right as they're trying to comfort her, something grabs Lacey's hair and pulls her down so hard that she gets knocked out. Kelsey said said that as soon as this happened, she saw exactly what did this. And still to this day, over 5 years later, it still haunts her. She said she saw this pale, white-faced creature with Lacey's hair in its teeth as it was smiling, and there was all over its teeth. She's looking at this thing, and this thing is just looking back at her with Lacey's hair in its teeth, smiling at her and coming out of its mouth. As Kelsey is looking at this thing, absolutely horrified, she feels this big shove, and she gets shoved to the ground so hard that she hits her face on the ground, and now her mouth is She said Chloe was just standing there screaming as Kelsey is on the ground. Lacey's still knocked out. At this point, Kelsey looks at Chloe and is just like, call my mom and tell her to come get us. Chloe runs inside of the house as Lacey is still knocked out, and Kelsey is just sitting there tasting her own in her mouth, and this thing is still behind her, and she can hear it, but she's not looking at it because she's terrified to look at this thing, and she doesn't know what else to do, but her face hurts, so she doesn't want to get up. Kelsey said that she laid there for what felt like forever until her mom came and picked them up, and her mom gets out of the car, helps. At this point, I think Lacey is awake at this point. She helps Lacey get into the back seat. She helps Kelsey get into the back seat, and Chloe gets in the front seat, and she said that Chloe was just crying the entire way home. Kelsey said that to this day, she still sometimes will see that white face, especially when she's going through something hard, which I think is absolutely terrifying. And she also said that it just haunts her in her nightmares. She can't get it out of her head. So what did you guys think about this story? What do you think this was? Has anyone ever heard of anything like this in the Appalachian Mountains? That might be the first story that I've heard where someone actually got like hurt by something that was haunting them. Not that it was haunting them. Whatever this thing was, we don't know what it was. Or maybe someone in the comments can say what they think it was, because I would love to know if you know, and I'm sure she would too. But I don't even know what to say about this story. It's pretty terrifying. But any thoughts, suggestions, comments that you have, please drop them below. And then I also want to know what you thought the scariest part of the story was. I probably know what it was, but now I'm going to do my favorite part, which is the shout outs. Shab Nab Shan. I hope I said that correctly. I loved your comment. You said that you listen to my stories while you're doing everything, like making your lunches for your kids or doing housework. I love that so much. That's amazing. I listen to scary stories too, as you guys know, when I'm doing stuff. So I'm so glad that I get to be that for somebody else. You are the best. Thank you for being so supportive. You have no idea what that means to me. I loved that comment so much. It made me smile. So thank you for making my day. Thank you for being a part of my community, and thank you for being kind and leaving comments. You are the best. I love you. Priscilla Chicory, you left such a nice comment. Thank you so much for what you said. I feel like tonight I did not do the best job at telling my story because I'm so exhausted. I don't know if you guys can tell. I tried my hardest to get into it, but I literally am falling asleep. But I wanted to tell you guys the story. But what you said was so nice. So thank you so much for leaving that comment. Thank you so much for being a part of my community and being kind and telling me that. That was a cool thing to say, and I really appreciated that. So I love you. Thank you. Instead of doing the outro tonight, I do have to say something, and I'm going to make a video about this too. Guys, if you are a child, please don't send me your stories because I can't tell. In fact, I need you guys to tell me your age when you send me your stories from now on, because the problem is that I had to private a story the other day because I looked at the comment section and the person commented and said it was their story, and I went to their page and you were just way too young for me to be telling your story. So I'm sorry that I had to private your story, but I cannot be telling children's stories on here. It goes against my morals. I just don't feel right about it. So please.
Let's read another scary Reddit story. I had a terrifying encounter in the Appalachian Mountains, and I'm looking for answers. Let me start by saying I have lived in the Appalachian Mountains all my life and have experienced a lot of strange things. My family was Irish and settled in West Virginia, but I currently live in the North Carolina portion of these wonderful mountains. That being said, I have learned a lot about what really lurks in these dark woods, but this was like nothing I had ever experienced before. It all began with my golden retriever Ozzy growling like I had never heard before. He literally never growls, so that had me already uncomfortable, but this growl was bone-chilling. It was like he was getting ready to have to fight for his life or something. I took both him and my other dog out around 11 p.m., and he would not leave my side. I noticed that my workshop door was open, so I walked down to close and lock it up. The entire time he is glued to my side. Ozzy also kept trying to get in between my legs, still growling, and all of his hair sticking up like a feral animal. The second I close the door, all hell breaks loose in the woods. It sounded like 50 full-grown men had broken out into a full sprint, tearing through the woods. Trees were shaking and branches falling. In my life, I have never been that scared. We got back to the house before I shit my pants, and I got my pistol and mag light to figure out what the hell was out there. When the dog and I got back outside, we were surrounded by what sounded like people mumbling. It was everywhere. I shined the light all over the woods and couldn't see anything, but the sound was coming from all around. It sounded as if you got a full gym of people to baby mumble. You could almost make out words. That's why I don't think it was an animal. I almost immediately felt sick, like I was having a mix between a panic attack and the full swing of the flu. Back inside the house, it sounded like people were walking around all night. The windows were creaking, and you could clearly hear the sound of shoes on gravel. The mumbling never stopped. Every time I got up to check the house, my feet would touch the floor, and it would get dead silent. You couldn't hear birds, crickets, frogs, or anything. I was terrified and didn't sleep a wink. The air felt thick and evil all night. That's the only way I could explain the feeling. Imagine a soaking wet quilt being tossed over you. That's how I felt. I am looking for any answers as to what this could be. This wasn't like the normal spooky stories my grandma and great uncles used to tell me. Well, okay, is it a skiggly wiggly? Is it a feral person? Either way, that's freaking scary, and
Never actually told this story publicly because every time that I try and I start to hear myself and I start to realize how absolutely fucking ridiculous it sounds. I put my big girl pants on today, actually my husband's big ass pants, but regardless, we're wearing big pants and we're feeling brave, so we're gonna tell the story. So I live near the Appalachian Mountains and I grew up even closer to the Appalachian Mountains than I do now. If you know anything about Appalachian grandparents, you know that they tell stories. And some of those stories might sound to others like they are just trying to keep their children safe or like their grandchildren safe from the animals or things in the woods or anything like that, or just strangers in general. I mean, I suppose you could also explain it away as like Appalachian folklore. If you actually grew up in it, you kind of get a different view of things. One of those stories really stood out to me and my cousin at the time. So my grandma would tell me and my cousin all of these freaking crazy stories about the things that were in the woods beyond the trees behind her property. Well, not behind her property, but I mean like, you know, the wooded area of her property. So it's important to note that my grandparents' house was basically my cousin and I's house. Like my parents worked all the time, so I was always there, and her parents actually lived with my grandma upstairs in the, top of her house. Honestly, you'd think that we would know the woods like the back of our hand, but our grandmother would not allow us to go anywhere near those woods. She said nobody was allowed to go near them because it was just dangerous. And at the time, we had no idea why it was dangerous, and every time we would ask, she would just say, sometimes there are places where people just don't belong. And you know, as a kid, that freaked us out a lot. We were like, okay, we'll just believe you. When we got into our teenage years, it only fueled the curiosity. And so one day, we decided to go out in the woods and see why it was so dangerous. So one day, I remember we waited until my grandma was asleep. Not like asleep, but she used to take day naps a lot. We would wait until she fell asleep on one of her little day naps. And we snuck out of the house basically to go exploring. We ended up getting to this place pretty deep in the woods, actually. Like we had been walking for a very long time before we had reached this little like dilapidated handmade sign that said White Bone Ridge. And immediately upon going past this sign, we realized why it was called that, because every single stone there was like this oddly like light color, and it looked like bones. Those rocks looked like freaking bones. So beyond that point was like even denser, even thicker forest than we had already walked through to get to that point we were already at. I swear to you, once we got to the edge of that tree line, that's when things started to shift. My intuition was telling me to leave. My pride was telling me to press on. You can just guess which side won. Whatever, we go in and we just start exploring more. We keep going, marking our way so that we are not to get lost. And then we end up coming across a cave, which I know what you're thinking. Why would you go inside of a cave that you just randomly find? I know, and I wouldn't do it to this day. But we went inside the cave, okay? And this cave was fucking cold, bro. And I don't mean like just a little chill. I mean, bro, that was ice cold. The entrance itself wasn't especially like large or anything like that, but it was like enough of a size to get through, and it looked like things had gotten through. Which, looking back now, like that could have definitely been an animal, and we definitely could have been slaughtered. But honestly, what we found inside was way worse than an animal. I honestly wish it was a fucking bear. We go into this cave, and the deeper we go into the cave, the more we start to see like the walls of it starting to smooth out more and more and more. And it doesn't really look like it's very natural. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen like what it looks like when fingers or hands have like smoothed out a surface over time. It kind of looked like that, like something had been walking in or like squeezing itself in, and it like, you know, rubbed against the material to make it smooth like that. It's a very distinct look. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you don't really know. But honestly, the first moment that I started to feel genuine fear rather than like the little flickers of fear that I was, or like more like adrenaline that I was feeling of like, oh my God, we're in this fucking cave. Oh my gosh, there's something wrong. No, bro, the first fear strike that I actually really felt was when I started to notice like these like cave markings, and some of them had like dust still in them, as if something had recently made those markings. But stupidly, we continued to go because my cousin convinced me that it was probably just a fucking animal, which I don't know why that would convince me, like I said, because what if it was a fucking bear or like a mountain lion or something? Like, what the hell? I'm thinking, okay, I'm not gonna wimp out right now. Like, we're already here. We might as well see what the danger really is, right? So we keep going, and as we're going, it's like this like really narrow, like I would say like a hallway type thing, but it's really narrow. And it ends up opening into this big cavern, which honestly, it was giving The Descent. You know what I mean? Have you ever seen that movie? So we get into this cavern and we're shining our flashlights around, and this thing is so big that honestly, like our flashlights are not reaching every corner. As soon as we get in there, we start to hear footsteps off in the darkness in front of us. So we froze, and when we did that, the footsteps also froze. Stayed silent for a good like 2 minutes, I swear to God, and we heard no other noise, so we were probably like, okay, we're just freaking ourselves out. It's our footsteps, you know, like whatever. So we continue to go, we keep walking, but this time we're more weary. We're not like, you know, haphazardly walking around anymore. We are like in a huddle, like with our flashlights in front, like, okay, we're gonna keep going now. But that decision to go forward would change our perception of these forests forever and make us believe in all the folklore, seriously. All those crazy stories that Grammy used to tell, yeah, they're gonna seem way less crazy after this. Then we started to hear shuffling, and it was fucking loud. Like, it was like right off in the dark sections that our flashlights were not reaching. So it was like a case of fight or flight, and we chose to freeze. We're frozen in the middle of this big giant open fucking cavern, and we're flashing our flashlights around, and we start to notice that like the materials on the walls are moving. Like what we thought were just like stones or like, you know, some kind of something, because they were standing so still before, we didn't realize that it was an actual being. As we're shining our flashlights around the sides of the cavern, we start to pay more attention than we had before. And we start to see faces within what we thought were just pale white rocks, because like I was telling you, this space that we found, those rocks and like the stones and stuff were like white as bones. Can I say like one more fucking time? Comment down below how many times I said like in this video. Jesus Christ. Dude, these things were stark white. And by this point, they were all staring at us. And by all, I mean, there was a lot. Way more than we were expecting. Way more than we even thought. We weren't expecting to see that. I mean, way more than I was initially expecting after I had seen, like, the faces. Bodies were super fucking thin, and their arms were way too long for their bodies. Like, honestly, it was giving the creature from Backrooms, but with a big, pale, white face with these ginormous saucer eyes. I swear to God, these eyes were so big, they looked like black moons on these things' faces. We're still standing there with our flashlights shining on these things, and all of a sudden, one of them moves forward, like slightly, more into the light. That's when our fight or flight really kicked in. We got out of freeze mode, and we got the fuck out of there. Honestly, I don't even remember the run back, to be honest with you. I just remember my lungs were burning, my body was on fire, my ribs felt like they were cracking out of my fucking chest by the time we reached the edge of the woods. I don't think anything was following us out of the cave, but I think like adrenaline just really made me feel like there was, but I don't think that anything followed us. But yeah, if you live in Appalachia and your grandparents have ever told you the story of the moon-eyed people of the mountains,
don't trust the voices in the Appalachian Mountains. Welcome back to the series where I tell true horror experiences submitted by you, the viewers. Today's viewer is going to remain anonymous, but a big thank you for submitting your story. This one is absolutely terrifying, and the more I hear about this place, the more I'm just not going to go. I quite like my life, and I do want to preserve it. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. Today's story takes place in North America, where we're going back to the United States. I was visiting my grandparents. They live in Pennsylvania, deep into the Appalachians. For some context as to how secluded it was, the nearest gas station was around 10 miles away, and my phone would either get none to 1 bar of service, 2 if you were incredibly lucky. Now, the house itself was a 2-story one. My grandparents claimed that it had been built in the 30s, but for me, the only standout feature was that it smelled of a mix of dust and mold. Delightful. With the property being located where it is, I can say truthfully that I had no idea about the rules of the Appalachians until after going. I was aware of legends such as the Wendigo, for example, but I honestly never believed that they were real. The first and second night were fairly normal, nothing odd occurring besides the sound of a couple twigs snapping at night, though that was most likely just a couple of animals. But when the third night arrived, let's just say something was different. The noises returned, but instead they felt more intentional. That night I had forgotten to lock the windows and subsequently close the blinds. Rookie mistake, I know. And then later in the night I found myself awake in a state of sleep paralysis. Instead of twigs snapping outside, now there was this thudding. It sounded unnatural, too big to be a bear and too loud to be a human, just out of place. Nothing else really happened for the remainder of the trip until the final night, of course, when I found myself in another state of a sleep paralysis episode. Thankfully, I'd remembered to lock the windows, but once again I had forgotten to close the blinds, and when I realized, it was too late, of course. So there I was, lying in my bed still, for around 5 minutes. And strangely enough, those 5 minutes felt peaceful. But then the crickets stopped chirping, and I heard a familiar voice coming from outside. "Axel, it's me, your dad. Come out here real quick, there's something out here with me." I have no idea who or what it was. But one thing's for sure. Whatever it was, had no idea that 2 weeks prior, my father had passed away. "Axel, come outside. It's me, your dad. Come outside now." Every time it spoke, it kept getting louder and angrier, until suddenly my mother burst into the room. She claimed to have heard something strange, and as quickly as the voice had arrived, it left. To this day, I still struggle to comprehend what happened that night. Whenever I tell people about this experience, they refuse to believe me. Maybe it's easier that way, because there is something out there, and that something is absolutely terrifying.
I got an email from a girl who said that she went to the Appalachian Mountains with her cousin and some other people and experienced a mimicking her cousin while her cousin was there, and this thing was just terrorizing them. So we're gonna call this girl Scarlett for the story. So this happened to Scarlett 3 years ago. One day, Scarlett and her cousins decided that they want to go on a trip together. Now, they grew up in the city, so they are around noise, streetlights, people everywhere. So when her and her 2 cousins got the chance to spend a week at her grandparents' cabin in the Appalachian Mountains, they were beyond excited. They imagined hiking, campfires, late night talks, finally seeing the wilderness instead of concrete. This cabin was very deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It was hours away from the nearest town. The cabin belonged to their grandmother and their grandfather before they passed, and her grandmother was always peaceful there, but she did say that before she left, she reminded her of some rules. And like I said, her grandmother was a very positive lady, but when she was giving her these set of rules, she was not smiling. She said, "Do not look through the windows at night. Do not follow any voices you hear. Do not respond to them. If you hear something, no, you didn't. If you see something, no, you didn't. If you hear a whistle, do not whistle back." Now, as they're driving up to the mountains. They're all in the car together and they're talking about how their grandmother had told them about these rules, and they're kind of just laughing about it. To them, this kind of just sounded like old mountain superstition. Like it was just stories to scare kids. So they finally get there, they settle in, and the first night feels normal. She said that the air was very cold and cleaner than the city, and that she just remembered the trees being so tall that they blocked the sky. So they're just unpacking everything, enjoying themselves. They're talking about how peaceful everything feels. They really like being there. So they hang out for a little bit, right? And then midnight hits and they're all just chilling in the living room, when all of a sudden they realize something. It seems very quiet. It seems a lot quieter than it normally is. The forest goes completely silent, and before it was making noises of animals, of bugs, of insects, just regular noises that woods make. She said suddenly it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt weird. She felt very uncomfortable, and then they heard it. A whistle coming from outside. So they're all looking at each other like, what the hell is going on? And she looks over at one of her cousins, and her cousin just kind of smirked nervously and was like, it's probably a hiker. Come on. But again, it was midnight, and who would be hiking that late at night? And why whistle like that? Then they start noticing something. The sound is moving. The whistling is circling around the cabin, and it's continuing. It starts to get closer, and then further away, and then close again. They're all clearly a little freaked out, but the way that her cousins are coping with it is to kind of joke around a little bit, and one of her cousins actually goes to whistle, and as soon as she does this, Scarlett grabs her arm to stop her. And she says to her, if you remember Nana's rule, if you hear a whistle, don't whistle back. At this point, they're like, you know what, let's just go to sleep. Let's turn off all the lights, go to sleep, forget about this. This is a little freaky. It's a little too freaky for me. Like, let's wait till morning. So they go to sleep, and nothing happens. And the next morning, they wake up, and they convince themselves that this was just kind of like their mind playing tricks on them, or that it was nothing. Maybe it was a hiker. That day they went out to go enjoy the woods. They were taking pictures, they were hiking, they were talking, they were just enjoying the wilderness, and they kind of felt stupid for being scared from the night before. This goes on for the rest of the day. They're really enjoying themselves. They're just walking around. When afternoon comes and they hear something, they hear this screaming sound. Now, this was not just a regular scream. This was a desperate scream coming from deep into the forest. It sounded like somebody was in trouble. They all just stand there and they're just frozen, looking at each other like, what the hell was that? And the scream comes again, but this time it is shorter, and it sounds shorter because it sounds like somebody had their mouth grabbed halfway through. So if someone were to like scream, but it was stopped by someone putting their hand over their mouth, so the end of it being kind of muffled. So one of her cousins decides that she's going to step through the trees, and she's kind of walking towards the sound when she stops, because she again remembers one of her Nana's rules, and that is don't follow any voices. So they decide that they're going to go back inside. Well, it's around nighttime at this point, and the night kind of feels heavy. They're a little freaked out at this point. They've experienced a lot. The night before was a lot. They had convinced themselves later in the day that everything was okay. They felt stupid about it, and then this whole screaming thing happened, and now they're back at the house and everything feels heavy. So they're uncomfortable at this point. So they lock all the doors and they turn off most of the lights, and they're just kind of chilling for a while until about 1 a.m. So 1 a.m. hits, and they're all just kind of sitting in the living room when suddenly they hear something. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking around the cabin. You can hear the leaves crunching. Whatever this is moving very carefully. Then they hear a tap, tap, tap right on the window that goes outside. She said it was very soft, but very deliberate. All three of them just turn towards the sound, and then they hear it again. Tap, tap. Scarlett said that every instinct inside of her wanted to open that curtain and see what was there. But again, the rule was clear. Do not look through the windows at night. Now she's thinking to herself, almost every single thing that my Nana has told me not to do, I have experienced at this point. So she is scared, and they are all scared. So they do nothing. They just sit there, and the tapping doesn't happen again. But then they hear it. The whistling again. It was closer than before, and it was directly outside of the house. And then something that would absolutely baffle them, terrify them to their core happened. They hear clear as day, Scarlett, in her cousin's voice coming from outside while her cousin is sitting right next to her. She said that the voice sounded exactly like her cousin's, same tone, and even had the same nervous laugh at the end that her cousin sometimes gets when she's nervous. So it was literally mocking her and mimicking her. Scarlett's body is just cold. She is terrified, and they all are. And suddenly they hear it again. Scarlett. It's coming from the other side of the cabin. Scarlett wanted to answer. She wanted to scream that they were inside and that it was impossible for this person to be her cousin, because she knew that her cousin was sitting right there. But again, she is still following these rules to a T, and good for her. So they stay silent, and suddenly the window just shatters. Glass explodes inward everywhere, spraying across the floor. So they're all screaming at this point, and they are just backing away, and the night air is just rushing in. It is so cold. All three of them just look away. They refuse to look outside. Whatever this was wanted them desperately to respond in some way, shape, or form, and they were not going to give in to that. And they start hearing this dragging across the wall, this slow scraping sound just dragging across the wall, like nails across the wall. And then all of a sudden everything stops. The whistling stops. The dragging across the wall stops. Everything is completely silent, and somehow they are more terrified by the silence than they are what was happening prior. So they're just waiting, listening. Glass is all over the floor. They're not looking outside. And then after a few minutes, they hear this, just this weird breathing right outside the broken window. One of her cousins starts to cry at this point, and she's crying silently, but Scarlett just goes and covers her mouth so that the sound doesn't carry. Then, from the darkness of the hallway, they hear something moving inside of the cabin. Then they hear a floorboard just creak. All Scarlett can think about this entire time is if you hear something, no you didn't. If you see something, no you didn't. Don't follow the voices, just over and over in her head. So they did not move, they did not speak, they did not look. And they hear the floor creak again. And she said that now she could literally hear the steps moving towards them inside of the house. And it just stopped. And then they just sat there all night long until sunrise came. And everything just went silent completely. She said that the next morning that the woods felt completely normal again. The birds were chirping, they could hear insects. Everything felt too normal. There was no marks on the walls. They could not see footsteps anywhere. Like, there was no reason for the glass to have shattered like that. They could not find any reason whatsoever. But they all packed in silence and they left immediately. She said that this experience made her feel different about a lot of things, and that she doesn't feel like she is the same person as she was before she went to the Appalachian Mountains. That this unlocked some fear in her that she did not know that she had. And I can completely understand why, because that is terrifying. What do you guys think this was? I mean, this got into the house. That's what scares me. I didn't know that these type of things could get inside of your house. Do you think this was a mimic? Do you think this was something else? Do you think this was like... And I have no idea. This story was terrifying. But I have no time left. I literally have 10 seconds left, so I can't do the outro and I can't do the shout outs. I'm so sorry, but I want your thoughts, opinions, suggestions in the comments. But as always, please be...
All right, so just imagine that you're driving on a lonely country road. It's late, it's midnight, it's dark outside, and a 7-foot tall, huge giant creature with glowing red eyes suddenly appears right in front of you. And that's exactly what happened to two different couples on November 16th of 1966. This happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So Linda and Robert Scarberry were out with their friends, Steve and Mary Mallet. They were just out for like a late night, like little outing. They happened to be driving by like this big power plant area, and all of a sudden they saw what they described to be like this man-shaped creature or something sort of thing. Something along the lines of like a man-bird creature. But it was just standing in the middle of the road, and its eyes were glowing like freaking bicycle reflectors. Naturally, they floored it and got the fuck out of there. But the creature unfurled like 10-foot-long wings and chased after them, chasing their car at over 100 miles an hour on back roads. A couple later described how it like rose up like a freaking helicopter. No matter how fast they went, this thing was always keeping pace with them. They were hysterical by the time they got back to town and told the sheriff. Very next day, the headline of the Point Pleasant newspaper read, "Couples see man-sized creature thing something." And as you would expect, that initial report unleashed a frenzy. And for years after that, dozens of people around Point Pleasant area were like reporting sights of this Mothman creature. This thing was seen all the time, like lurking over people's homes, even taking family pets. There's one story about this man's German Shepherd who disappeared after the guy saw literally 2 glowing red eyes off in the distance, like in his backyard. His dog completely gone after this. And this truly became part of Appalachia's lore, I think in like 1967 when this bridge collapsed in Point Pleasant, and they said that they had seen Mothman right up on the bridge before it collapsed. That's like one of the things that kind of spread his name throughout Appalachia at first. Basically, that's how like the legend of Mothman came to be. And honestly, with the things that I've seen in Appalachia growing up here, I believe it. There's almost nothing I won't believe after living out here. West Virginia hosts way more than just that one scary cryptid. Rewind a bit to 1952 in the flat woods of West Virginia. On September 12th of 1952, there were these two young brothers who saw like this big fiery object fly across the sky and a seemingly like crash land up towards the mountain range. And this was just outside their village, so it was like within their means to walk to. And of course, being two young boys, they were very adventurous and they wanted to go see, so they went to go see. But what they see, they wish they had not seen. But they didn't want to go by themselves, so they brought their mothers with them as well as two other friends. So this posse goes on to investigate. But might I add, there was a dog too. Once they got to the site, one of the boys' flashlights illuminated something that was so utterly grotesque and out of this world that none of them had ever seen in their lives. Honestly, something that would scar them for the rest of their lives. They all came face to face with this 10-foot tall figure with a blood red face and greenish skin. It said that the creature's head was like a spade or like an ace of hearts, almost like a hood, and it had these glowing orangey eyes and claw-like hands, and it emitted this really nauseating smell. Smell was so nauseating that some of them were gagging and throwing up. So horrific, in fact, that some of the kids even wet themselves and the dog was whimpering and crying. Their eyes were burning. Obviously, the group fled for their lives as fast as they could back through the woods the way that they came. They got back and they told everybody they were convinced that they had seen this like Frankenstein-like creature off in the distance of the woods, like out beyond the village. And then this hit the local news, and then it became nationwide news. And this actually later became to be known as one of the most famous UFO encounters of this era. That era, I should say. Even to this day, that tiny town still proudly proclaims itself as being the home of the green monster. They even have this like cute little Flatwoods Monster Museum. Leave it to humans to monetize off of your local nightmare, right? But yeah, crazy things happen out in these hills. There's absolutely eyes out there that we can't see watching us.
This story is so creepy. I don't know what to make of it. The person who sent the story in would like to remain anonymous, so we're going to call him Shane. This took place when Shane was about 19 years old in the Appalachian Mountains. Yes, here we go. Shane's home situation wasn't the best, and his mom had remarried, and his new stepdad was, you know how that goes. So when Shane's uncle offered for him to crash at his place in rural West Virginia till he figured things out, Shane took him up on the offer. It was just the two of them out there. Woods right behind the property. The nearest town was a good ways down the road. But they liked it that way. They were good company for each other. They'd go fishing together, work on the property together, and it was actually a really nice setup for them. Until Dale didn't come home from a hunting trip. Dale left one morning for a hunting trip and he did not return that evening. Shane said at first he didn't even think anything of it because Dale had done this sometimes. He'd head out and sometimes just decide to stay and set up camp. So unbothered, Shane just goes to bed. But day 2 came and went and still no Dale. And so Shane has this sinking feeling inside of his chest and he thinks he'd better go and call the family. So he drives down the road until he receives cell phone service because yeah, it was out there. So he gets a hold of some family and everybody starts to panic and they're all trying to figure out who's gonna do what, look where, and obviously call the police. Okay, so it's day 3 now and all of a sudden Dale just walks up the driveway. He was acting like nothing happened and everybody's there and they're freaking out and they're asking him questions and he is utterly confused and he is just like, what are you even talking about? As far as he was concerned, he was only gone for a few hours. They were like, Dale, you were gone for 3 days. And so the family eventually just had to talk themselves into whatever made them feel better. And honestly, Shane did too. Like maybe he hit his head out there and was disoriented or something. Until he noticed something. Dale's boots and clothing were completely clean, like spotless. Like he was out there for like 3 days roughing it and it didn't look like he was gone at all. So Shane just kind of brushes it off because like, what do you even say? And then for a few days, things seem to go back to normal. Until about a week or so later, Shane wakes up in the middle of the night. It was one of those nights where he was tossing and turning and he just couldn't get to sleep. So he decides he's going to go to the kitchen and get a drink of water. He enters the kitchen and he's doing his thing and he notices that the door was slightly open. He goes to close it and he looks up and he can see through the glass something down towards the tree line. And then he realizes it's Dale and he's standing there facing the woods. And at first, Shane was thinking he's just going to go back to bed, But then he realizes Dale's arms and hands moving. He was moving them as though he were in a heated conversation, making his points and gesturing and pointing, like he was having a full-on animated conversation with somebody or something. So Shane is standing there and he is watching this go on for what seems like forever. It had to be at least 10 minutes. A while trying to make out what it was that he was talking to, but he could see nothing. So eventually Dale turns around and he starts making his way back in the house, and Shane kind of quick heads to bed. He doesn't want him to know he saw him. So Shane started to pay attention after that. And there were nights when he was up late talking to friends online, and he would notice that around 2 a.m, his uncle would leave the house and go and stand down at the tree line and talk to something. And then one night, Shane comes home really late. He had been out with some friends, and as he came up the driveway, the headlights illuminated into the yard and touching the tree line. And there stands Dale looking into the dark forest again. And he's not just standing there talking, he's standing there nodding, like he's listening to something talking to him. And Shane's just sitting there for the longest time looking, and like there is nothing there. Like there is nothing visible that Dale could possibly be talking to. So after a while, he just drives up, parks, and goes in the house. Okay, so fast forward to the next morning, and Shane comes down and he's tired of pretending he's not seeing what he's absolutely seeing. So talking over coffee, he brings it up, but he's trying to keep it casual. Okay, so he goes, "Hey, I saw you outside again last night. What's up with that?" And Dale's just looking down into his coffee, and he never looks up. And he just says, "Couldn't sleep, had to get some air." But Shane pushes a little more, and he's like, "No, I've seen you go out there a few times, and it looks like you're talking to someone." And then, guys, Dale slowly looks up from his coffee, and he has this blank expression on his face, one that Shane says he's never seen before. Oh my God, I have chills. And then he goes, "I don't know what you think you're seeing, Shane, but there's nothing out there." And then he got up and he left the room. No, thank you. Shane said that that moment scared him more than anything he saw out the window, because that was so unlike Dale. Dale was a super nice, really easygoing guy, and the guy who just walked out the kitchen wasn't Dale. After that, Shane says that the whole dynamic of the house shifted. Dale was increasingly negative and snippy and just completely not himself, and he was closed off and irritable. And Shane noticed that he was now down at that tree line almost every single night now. Shane said he even started sleeping with the door locked, as one would. So shortly after that, Shane ended up finding other living arrangements because it was just too freaky for him. He says every now and then he'd check in with his uncle, but he never really went back to that place. To this day, he has no idea what the heck could have been going on. Honestly, you could make a freaking movie out of it. Guys, what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. I'm sure Shane will be in there looking too. I mean, I've heard a lot of wild things go on in the Appalachian Mountains, but this is a whole new tier. All right, let me know in the comments. And if you have a creepy story of your—
This is a res story I heard near Cherokee, North Carolina. There was this guy who said when he was younger and he lived with his parents that his dad would, at night, they had these pieces of plywood attached to hinges that they would close over the windows and they would padlock. And he always wondered why every night his dad would padlock the windows shut. Well, one day he decided to ask his father, and he said, "Father, why do you lock the windows at night? What are you trying to keep out?" And his dad just looks at him and says, "You don't ask about that. We don't talk about it. You ask anymore, you're going to be grounded. You're going to be in trouble." And he was surprised that his dad was so angry when he'd asked that question. And so he always wondered in the back of his mind, what was he trying to keep out of the house? Well, one night he is in his bedroom and he's having trouble sleeping. And he looks over at his alarm clock and it's exactly 3:03 a.m. And he starts hearing, and he hears this whistling, coming from outside of the house. And he keeps hearing it over and over again. So he gets up and he goes out into the living room, and he goes, and his dad is out there kind of frantically moving back and forth, pacing around. And he goes, "Dad, why are you, what is that whistling? Why are you up? And what is that whistling sound? Are you making that?" And he goes, No, stop talking about it. look, you need to go back into your bedroom and go to sleep. It'll be all right. And he said his dad was just like terrified. And so he went back into his bedroom, and he said it went on for a little bit and then it stopped. And he said he started to realize, like, late at night, every time at 3:03 a.m., right, he would hear whistling, and it would sound like it was coming from outside the house. And his dad would be up, just sort of walking the hallways, walking the floors, like freaking out. So, he was always confused about what this sound was. So one day he goes over to the neighbor's house, and he goes, at night we hear this whistling sound, and it happens every night, at the same time. Like, do you know anything about it? Do you hear the whistling? And he said, the neighbor said, you need to go home right now. Like, and his neighbor wouldn't talk about it and was like creeped out and like instantly like went inside his house. So he kept trying to get it out of people in town. Like, does anybody know about like this whistling sounds that happen at night? Like, do you know what that is? No one would talk about it. So one night he is like hanging out with his brother in his bedroom, and they decided they were going to kind of stay up late telling some scary stories. Well, at like 3:03 in the morning, they hear, and they hear the whistling. And he tells his brother, like, do you hear that? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, every morning I hear that at like 3:03, and like dad freaks out and stuff. And his brother's like, well, why don't you just like try and open one of the windows up and, see if you could get the key, unlock the padlock, and look out the window. And he's like, what? No, are you kidding? Like, dad would freak out. Dad would freak out. And his brother's like, well, if you're not brave enough, I'll go do it. So he said his brother like snuck out into his parents' bedroom and got like his dad's keys and went over to one of the windows, unlocked it, and then moved the plywood away from the window. And when he looked out the window, he sort of just jumped back, and he turned around and had just this look of dread on his face. And he didn't talk, he didn't say anything. And so he kept asking his brother, like, what did you see? What did you see? And his brother wouldn't say anything. And his brother's like, I'm going to go to bed. And he said right as his brother started walking to the bedroom, all of a sudden at the door, he hears boom, 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 boom. Someone is knocking at the door. And he hears it again. Boom, 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 boom. This loud knocking. And he goes up to the door and gets really close. And all of a sudden, his dad comes running out and grabs him and says, do not open that door, son. And he's like, why? Who's out there? Like, who's outside? And he's like, we can't say anything about it. We don't talk about it. Like, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And he said all night long, they heard the knocking on the door. So the next morning when he gets up, right, his brother is very, very ill. And it's like his brother just got worse and worse, and then eventually passed away. And he said he always attributed his brother what he had seen out of that window. Like, maybe that is what was the cause of what happened to him. And he said still to this day, his father will not talk about it, what was outside.
All right, this is the most intense cryptid story from the Appalachia I have ever heard. Oh, side note, how do you pronounce it? Appalachia or Appalachian? Because where I'm from, we actually refer to them as the Appalachian Mountains. But anytime I hear about them on TikTok, everyone says Appalachia. So that's how I pronounce it for the majority. Anyway, let's get into it. So one of my followers, their name is Jaylyn, tells this story from when they were 6 years old. So they're actually from the Philippines, but during this time, the parents had moved them to the Appalachian Mountains. They made note that during the first month, everything was fine living there. They even looked up the rules of the Appalachia, and if you know, you know, and they were abiding by them very closely. So they weren't very concerned. One night while they were eating dinner, the curtains hadn't been closed for the night, and Jaylyn looked up and saw something outside the window. It was a white, slender figure with its mouth open wide, full of sharp teeth. The texture of its skin were like fish scales. Its ears were pointy and sharp, and its eyes were dark and wide, almost like void of actually having eyeballs. So immediately they tell their parents, but by the time that everybody looked, it was gone. So they just brushed it off, claiming that they were probably just seeing things. So now it's bedtime, and the father goes and he locks all the doors and pulls thick black curtains in front of every window. Jaylyn and mom were already in the bedrooms. Jaylyn in the bed and the mother full folding some clothing and putting it away in the closet. And then Jalen notices something else. The cross that hung near to the closet was upside down. So they immediately tell the mother, and she looks at it, and everybody's really stressed out. So she calls down to the father, but he doesn't respond, which is really weird and unlike him. So the mother quickly goes down to get him, leaving Jalen alone in bed. They're just sitting there, very scared, hoping that nothing else goes wrong. And then all of a sudden, coming from the window in front of Jalen, there was loud banging behind that thick black curtain. Something or someone was trying to get in. So Jalen calls for mom, and she comes flying back up in the room. And this banging is so loud, it sounds like the window is going to break. So the mother and Jalen hide underneath the bed, and the father hides underneath a thick black wooden table that sat next to the bed. And then the window shatters and breaks open, and this thing thumps inside the room. They hear the sounds of its footsteps kind of searching for them. And Jalen sees its feet covered in scales, and it had long, sharp brown claws. So they are remaining dead silent in their hiding places as this thing lumbers through the room. And when it finally leaves, they can breathe a sigh of relief. So Jalen's father grabs a big plank of wood and sort of barricades off that broken window. The mother calms them down, and the father and mother stay up guarding the place while Jalen tries to get some sleep. So the next morning, everybody wakes up early, and the mother is cooking breakfast, and the father is trying to do as much research as possible about the Appalachian Mountains and what the heck that thing could have been. They are all so shaken and terrified from what happened and in disbelief, because for that first month, everything was fine. So Jalen says that for the next 3 months, this creature kept on returning to their home. Every time it would come around, it was always exactly at midnight, and it would be pounding on the windows as if it were demanding to get in. So after the 3 months of these recurring visits of this creature, they decided that they are just going to go back home to the Philippines. Even to this day, they are still all very freaked out about it. How freaking traumatizing. Jalen still has nightmares about this thing. Jalen hopes that telling this story might help out other families who could be in danger of experiencing something similar. Have you ever heard of anything that fit that description before? Let us know in the comments. I'm sure Jalen will be in there reading them. And if you have your own creepy Appalachia story, I would love to hear it. And if you're new here, you gotta follow for more creepy stories.
If you grew up in Appalachia, chances are you've heard of this before. This is the type of story that gets passed down through campfires, through dinners, through hunting with your grandfather, or if you're me and my cousin, it came straight from our grandmother's mouth. Nonetheless, the warning of this story is always the same. If you hear somebody calling your name from the woods late at night, no you didn't. That's probably one of the oldest rules in the book when it comes to Appalachia. I know it might sound very dramatic from an outside standpoint, but people from Appalachia say that with a complete straight face because it's true. Honestly, it's not just one of those stories that is like, oh, this is like a funny little paranormal ghost story. No, this is one that reminds you to lock your doors at night. So the story begins somewhere around eastern Kentucky in the 1930s. Back then, life in the mountains looked very different than it does today. I'm talking about communities that were so isolated that you would have to walk miles through dense forest to reach your nearest neighbor. Once darkness fell, darkness really was upon you. There was not any streetlights or any kind of lamps or anything like that. No, you were in complete and utter darkness. Of course, you did have your little lantern, but that didn't really help much either. Darkness is so thick that it literally cuts everything beyond the lamplight. One of those small mountain communities named a young girl named Ruth. Ruth was not known to be very reckless at all. She was more known to be the curious cat. Most people stayed close to the familiar trails around the area. Ruth liked to explore. She loved to spend all of her afternoons exploring old logging roads, old trails that most people don't even dare go near. And there was this one place where people told her specifically not to go. That was a place called Dead Man's Hollow. That name alone sounds very wrong. The weird thing about that place is that nobody could ever come to an agreement about why it was called Dead Man's Hollow. But no matter what the elders told Ruth, she was not into superstitions and she just went along anyways. One evening, just before sunset, little Ruth decided that she was going to go explore Dead Man's Hollow and see for herself what this whole mystery was about. The trail leading there was this old logging road that had not been used for years. Trees had become reclaiming parts of it. There were branches just like overhanging through it. It didn't look like a road at all. At first, everything seemed completely normal. You could hear the birds settling down for the evening and the unmistakable sound of insects in the bush. As she was walking, listening to the crunching of her own feet on the gravel, she heard somebody say, "Ruth." Like anybody, that sound stopped her instantly. She stopped and she listened, and she realized this voice is the voice of my mom. It wasn't just a similar sounding voice. It was the warmth of her mother's voice. It was the tone of her mother's voice. The same voice that she had heard every day for her whole entire life. There was no mistaking it for anything else. The problem was that her mother was at home nearly 2 miles away. Ruth just stood there trying to make sense of it. Like, maybe she heard something else. Maybe it was just the wind. Then she heard her name again. But this time it was closer than it was before. Without really thinking about it, she started walking towards the voice. Looking back on it later, Ruth said that this is when she started to feel really uneasy. Every time that she would go to walk nearer to the sound, it would just end up sounding further and further away. Nothing extremely dramatic, but just enough to where she was never able to fully reach the voice. Always sounded like it was just beyond the next ridge, just around the corner, just up a little bit further. But it never was. Somehow she kept following the voice. The deeper that she went into Dead Man's Hollow, the quieter the forest became. Birds disappeared first, then the insects, then all the other sounds. By then, the sun had completely vanished, so she was out there in the dead of night. But the voice still seemed to call her deeper and deeper into the forest, and as if she were in some kind of trance, she continued to follow the sound for hours. Then suddenly, it stopped, and Ruth found herself standing in the middle of the forest where she did not recognize anything at all. That's when she noticed something watching her. It was a woman standing between 2 trees several yards away from her. First glance, she looked normal, almost. She wore an old-fashioned dress that seemed decades out of place. Her skin looked unnaturally pale beneath the moonlight, and her smile was so big, it could not have been a normal person. Like, there's no way. It wasn't like cartoonishly wide, if you know what I'm saying. Like just too big, just barely too wide to make it seem uncanny valley. Then Ruth noticed the woman's eyes. They reflected the same way that a deer's eyes might in the headlights of a vehicle. Human eyes don't do that, yo. So as Ruth is just standing there staring at this thing, taking it all in, the woman speaks. She looks dead at Ruth and she says, "You aren't supposed to be here." Ruth did not stay to ask questions. She turned around and she got out of there. She did not stick around and wait like a horror movie character for any explanation at all. She ran, but she wasn't running alone. Something was following her. But according to Ruth, what was chasing after her did not sound like footsteps. It sounded like this thing was just gliding. When she got the bravery to look behind her, she saw these figures just gliding through the trees, keeping pace with her. It was weird to her because they never actually got any closer and they never actually got any further away. They literally just were keeping pace with her. By the time she finally got out of the forest, dawn was breaking. So like morning was already there. That's not even where it ends, okay? Because when Ruth gets home, her family is in hysterics. They start crying, screaming, freaking out. She just thought that it was because of all the injuries that were on her, because as she was running, she was crashing through the branches. She had scratches, bruises, cuts all over her. But that's not why they were freaking out. According to Ruth, she had only been gone for 1 night. According to her family, though, she had been missing for 8 days. 8 entire days. Search parties were sent out. Neighbors and community members had been combing the mountains looking for her. People started to even assume that she was dead. The local sheriff was actually beginning to, cease any kind of search party. Yet Ruth insisted that she had only been gone for a few hours. And things only got stranger upon her return. She stopped sleeping, she covered every single window in the house, and she refused to go outside after dark. Not even just go outside, she refused to look outside when it got dark. Ruth continuously would ask her family if anybody was out looking for her. And her family was confused by that, so they asked her what, and she just kept saying, the woman, is she out there? Is she looking for me? Is she coming for me? Weeks go by, and then Ruth's brother claims that he sees this woman standing at the edge of their property. A woman wearing old-fashioned clothes, just staring at the house. When he yelled at her, she just kind of vanished behind the trees. Soon neighbors began to report similar sightings, as well as hunters. Even travelers reported seeing this apparition. Children would tell stories to their parents about this woman dressed in weird clothes, smiling at them in an abnormal way from the tree line. And then one winter night, Ruth disappeared again. This time there was more evidence because this time there was fresh snow on the ground. So there was footsteps. They followed these footprints all the way to Dead Man's Hollow. Searchers followed these footprints for miles and miles and miles until randomly they just stopped. And they stopped in a place where there is nothing. It was like Ruth had taken one step and then just completely turned into dust particles. And despite extensive search efforts, Ruth was never found. Years later, hunters would still tell the story of this woman standing near Dead Man's Hollow. A pale woman in old clothing, one whose smile never looked normal. Some of them claim that if you stuck around for too long, you would hear her call your name. Never in her voice, it was always in a voice of somebody that you knew and loved, whether that be your mother, your brother, your sister, your cousin, your friend. Basically, whatever voice it could use to make you follow it. That's why some families in Appalachia still repeat that old warning. You hear somebody calling your name late at night, you better make sure you know absolutely certain who it is. Because sometimes, according to the mountains, it's...
I get another Appalachia story for you. West Virginia, and this one sounds like a horror movie. The story that this woman tells makes you seriously question whether you would ever want to work a night shift again. So this woman, we're going to call her Courtney for the story, works in a medical billing office in West Virginia. This is an old repurposed clinic from the 60s. Brick building right on the edge of a small town and a wooden ridge, basically growing up against the back of. So she's outside at around 3 a.m. on her smoke break, and she is sitting on this really low stone wall. So this wall she's sitting on is between the parking lot and the tree line, and she's just sitting there scrolling away on her phone, trying to stay awake as one does at 3 o'clock in the morning on that shift. So she's sitting there for about 3 minutes, and then she gets that prickling feeling up on the back of her neck. You know, the one where you just know something is watching you. So instinctively, she looks up and she sees there is a man standing along the wood line up against the edge of the property, about 20 feet away from her. Courtney says he is hunched over in this really wrong posture. She said his torso was twisted in a way, or like an angle that had to be painful. And what he was wearing, he was wearing this long, dirty trench coat that went down to about his shin. He had on blue surgical gloves and a faded medical mask, and it was covering everything below his eyes. And his eyes wide open, but sunken in. His eyes almost sunk into these dark hollows, yet they beamed in her direction, just staring at her. So Courtney is super nervous, obviously, and she's trying to keep it together and keep it nonchalant. So she's going back down with her eyes, looking down at her phone, kind of trying to play it off, but her hand is shaking. So for a little while, every now and then, she just like glances up and then looks back down, and she sees that he is not moving at all. Like he is in that same weird posture and just staring at her. So Courtney hears a coal truck in the distance, like down in the valley, and it kind of snaps her out of her, back and forth, up and down looking, just for a second. And then she kind of looks in the direction of the coal truck, looks back down at her phone, and in that amount of time, like 3 seconds, she looks up and oh my freaking gosh, she sees him. He is now sitting directly next to her, like an inch away from her freaking body. Seconds ago, he was 20 feet away, not moving. And now, right next to her. Like humanly impossible. She said he was sitting so close to her, she could hear his breathing. She said it sounded wet and rhythmic. She described it as, oh my gosh, somebody blowing bubbles through a straw. So everything inside of her is just screaming. Alarm bells are going off. But she grew up in Appalachia, so she is trying to think of the best course of action. She goes with try to be polite and gives him this very weak, forced smile. Now, I thought we don't acknowledge things in the Appalachia, but maybe I'm not up to par on the rule book. Okay, so she is terrified. She is smiling awkwardly. And then he reaches his gloved hand out towards her and he just says, "Cigarette?" So she fumbles with her pack of cigarettes and shakingly takes one out and hands it to him. He takes it and he's just holding it. He's just zoning out, holding the cigarette in his hand. He doesn't put it up to his lips or, mask. And he is just staring across the lot, just blank. So she says, "Do you need a light?" And he slowly turns and looks at her again. And with a stiffness, raises both thumbs up at her and just holds both thumbs, like giving her the thumbs up for 10 of the longest seconds straight of her life. And he's just staring at her with the thumbs up. So then she kind of gestures with the lighter and asks again, and he says, yes, I need one. And so she kind of hands it towards him. And with his gloved hand, he reaches to take the lighter from her, and his fingers graze her hand. And she said it was freezing to the touch, like completely way too cold for the temperature outside. So guys, he puts the cigarette in his mouth through the mask, and he lights it through the mask. And then he hands her the lighter back. So she crushes her cigarette out, and she kind of jumps up, and she's doing everything in her power to be as nonchalant as possible, but getting the F out of there. And she's like, have a good night. And she turns and walks away to the safety of the building. And guys, Courtney gets almost to the door when all of a sudden she hears a menacing laughing. She says it was deep and wet, and it sounded multiplied, as though there were multiple of whatever the heck that was, laughing, all in different tones. So she doesn't even look back. She just gets inside, closes the door, and locks it behind her, and just stands there, trying to catch her breath and to kind of relax now that she seems to be safe. And then she finally brings herself to look out the security window, and there is nobody there. The wall that they were just sitting on, totally empty. And she's looking around, and there is nobody anywhere in the whole area. And she said all that she saw lying there in the gravel right where he was a single cigarette snapped perfectly in half, not lit. She said she has never found out who or what the heck that thing was. Nobody else had reported anything similar, and she still does work on that night shift. I think it would be time to find a new job. How freaking creepy. Drop your thoughts in the comments, y'all. And if you have a creepy story of your own, you know what to do. And if you're new,
This story comes out of the Roanoke Valley region of Virginia. There was this family from New York who had lived in the city most of their life. They wanted to get away and, live that remote urban life. So they find this beautiful home on 16 acres in this secluded area of the Roanoke Valley in the Appalachian Mountains. And their first day moving in, the father, right, he notices something weird. The neighbor actually comes not to greet them, not to welcome them to the area, but to warn them. And he says very specifically, at night, make sure you lock your doors and your windows and you close the curtains. And he said it's very important, there is something out there. And he goes, you mean the people in this area are like really like that you have to lock your doors? And he goes, I'm not talking about people, it's something else. But that's all I'm going to say. Now just remember, lock your doors and your windows at night, you'll be all right. So the neighbor leaves. Well, the father kind of just shakes it off and is like, okay, whatever. So they live there for several months, and they really enjoy their new life. Well, this one particular night, the family is sitting in the living room and they have a fire going. That's when the father notices that the son is standing next to the window and he's staring at something very intently. And so he asks the son, what are you staring at? What's out there? And he goes, Father, there's a boy out there. Like, there's this young boy. Can I go and play with him? And the father's like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no boy around here. We live in the woods. Like, there's no one around here. And he's like, no, Father, there's a boy out there. There's a boy out there. And the father's like, you know what? Just, it's time for bed. Go to bed. And he doesn't really think anything of it. Over the next couple of weeks, right, this son keeps looking out the window at something and telling his father there's this boy outside. And he keeps drawing pictures of this boy. And he keeps saying, I really want to play with that boy. The father at the time just thinks, this is something to do with him moving and his active imagination. Until one night, the whole family is asleep. When the father wakes to a sound coming from the living room, he gets his wife up and he's like, I think someone's in the house. I think someone's broken in. Like, go and get the children, make sure they're safe. So he gets up, he goes down the hallway very slowly. And when he gets to the living room and he flips on the light, there's his son on the floor playing with his toys. And the front door is wide open. So he asks the son, like, what are you doing up? Why are you out of bed? And he goes, Father, I'm playing with the boy. And he goes, what boy? What are you talking about? And he said, the boy, he came inside and he was playing with me. And his father's like, there is no boy here. Like, there's no one around here that is your age. So he tells his son to go to bed. He goes to the front door and he, peers out. There's no one out there. He closes the door. Well, up until this point, he had been keeping this door unlocked because he felt like, we live in the woods, nothing's going to happen. But that night, he starts locking the door. Well, the next couple of weeks, right, is when they started to hear this banging sound at the front door, like someone was there. And when the father would go and answer the door, there would be no one there. And eventually, the father gets so frustrated and angry with whoever's knocking at the door that one night he hears the knocking. He goes to the front door, he opens it, and, he goes out on the porch and he starts screaming, what are you doing at my house? Like, leave us alone, leave my family alone, like, quit. And all of a sudden, he hears his name being called, and it sounds like a child's voice, and it's telling him to come out into the woods. So this father, like, kind of makes his way back inside, closes the door, and locks it. And at this point, he's like, something is definitely going on. So the next day, he goes into town and he goes to the local hardware store and he talks with some of the locals. And he starts telling them, I think something's after my family. I think something is trying to, like, scare us. And the locals say, look, we're not trying to be rude, but you need to take your family and get out of here and move back to town if you know what's best for you. And the father takes this as, oh, they're trying to scare me out of town because I'm from the city. So he goes back home and is like, they're not going to scare us. At this point, though, the family is so terrified that they are all sleeping in the same bedroom. And after a couple nights of them sleeping in the bedroom together, the father wakes up and he sees his son standing next to the window and he's staring at something. And he's like, what are you looking at? Like, what is out there? What is out there? And he goes, they're here. They're here, father. They're here. They're here. And he's like, who's here? And he's like, go back in the bed right now. He goes up to the window, and when he peers out, he sees all of these children standing around the house, and they have these bright, glowing white eyes. So he hurried up, he closes the curtains, and he gets in bed, and he holds his son, and he tells him go to sleep. The next few days, he's very nervous. He's very on edge, but he doesn't know what to do. That night, he goes to bed with the family in the bedroom. He wakes up, and he discovers his family is all gone. He searches the entire home. They are nowhere. The only thing he finds is that the front door is open. So he figures they've taken his family out into the woods. So he runs as fast as he can out into the woods, and he starts screaming, where's my family? Give me back my family. And all of a sudden, he hears some movement coming through the woods. And out of the shadows steps this young boy. And as this boy takes a couple steps closer, he realizes it's his son. And he has these glowing white eyes. And he looks at his father and he says, not yet. And the father takes off running as fast as he can back to the house. He gets in his car, he drives into town and goes to the local pub. And he starts screaming to them, like, they've got my family, they've taken my family, like, you have to help me. And then he runs out of the bar and he leaves. And that was the
I got a really creepy cryptid story for you from the Appalachia. So my follower named Ashley, who I will be tagging in this, sent me this story the other day, and oh my goodness. This happened to Ashley when she was just 13 years old, when they were living in the middle of nowhere in the Appalachian Mountains. To give you an idea of how far out they were, the closest neighbor was 12 miles up the road. So one night, Ashley's cousin came to stay with her, and she was from the city and never stayed in the woods before. So they decided that they were going to go camping at the end of Ashley's property. And this setup was perfect because there was a creek right there was an old fire pit, and even an old camper. And Ashley's dad said that, yeah, that was fine as long as they take the dog. She had a Great Pyrenees, by the way. And that worked out really well because that dog went everywhere with her. So they packed up a bunch of stuff, some board games, things to make s'mores and the like. They even brought her laptop so they could watch some movies. It was going to be a really good night. Or so they thought. So they get to the spot and they're at the fire and it's just about to get dark and they start to tell each other creepy stories. My kind of night. So then Ashley starts to tell her cousin this story about this old barn that's about a mile up the road. She said that it was a little bit off the road and it was dilapidated and falling apart. And sometimes at night they could hear weird noises coming from inside this barn. So Ashley's cousin wanted to check this place out. So they decided that they were going to wait until it got completely dark, until all the lights were off in their house, so that they could sneak out and go see this thing. So once everything was clear, they decided to head out to this barn. And once they got there, it was about 12:30 a.m. Ashley said they were acting crazy and trying to get a rise out of each other and try to freak each other out and scare each other. Remember that they had the dog with them, and on their travels, nothing really weird happened. The dog didn't act weird, so eventually they just got bored and headed back to the campsite. So ever since they had turned around and started making their way back, now the dog is starting to act strange. The dog kept turning around and looking back and almost seemed like it was trying to urge them forward faster. And then Ashley turns around to see what is the dog looking at. And she said that when she looked up, what she saw made her heart drop. She saw, standing up on top of the barn, what looked like a deer, but all wrong. She said it was standing up on two legs and it had a long gray body that just looked all wrong, and its arms were way too long for its body. And she saw its antlers on the top of its head, and she noticed its bright, glowing yellow eyes. Okay, so quickly they shut off their flashlights, hoping that it wouldn't have seen them. And they went over and kind of snuck behind a bush. And Ashley's cousin's like, "What are we doing?" And Ashley's like, "Hold on, like quiet, like don't say anything." And then you guys, they hear the sound of that thing jump off of the roof with a thud onto the ground. So they start screaming and running back to camp, and the dog beelined it for the creature. They get all the way home, and she said her dad was coming off of the porch, and they ran to him and they told him everything that happened. So Ashley's dad takes them inside to the mother, and then he gets his GUN and he calls his friend from up the road, and they go out to investigate. She says her mom tried to calm them down and tell them that everything was going to be okay, but everything was just crazy at this point. They were absolutely terrified, and Ashley was so worried for her dad and her dog, and they did not return until the break of day. When they finally did come back, her father and his buddy and the dog, all three did return, and they said that they were tracking this thing all night long, and it kept circling their property. Also, their poor dog was ripped apart on its side. So they called the vet, and the vet comes out and takes a look at this poor dog and says it appears as though the dog got ripped apart by a large cat. The vet said, judging by its injuries, that she is surprised that the dog even was able to get away. Ashley says that she is now 31 and the dog did survive for a while, and they only lost her a few years ago of old age. I am so happy to hear that the dog got to live a full life. And now Ashley ends it with this. She says that lately, all of a sudden, she's starting to see those same yellow glowing eyes. I know Ashley will be in the comments reading what your thoughts are. What do you guys think this was? I have heard of so many cryptids and also so many new things that I guess would be cryptids that I had never heard of before. So drop them in the comments. And if you've got your own creepy cryptid story, I would love if you would share it with me. If you're interested in creepy storytime merch, check out the LINK in my bio. And if you're new here,
Let's read some Reddit stories about haunted Airbnbs. Stayed at an Airbnb in Salem, Massachusetts on Essex Street. I will not disclose the address. Last night of our visit, I woke up at 3:20 a.m. Out of habit, I always check the time on my phone. I noticed the bathroom, hallway, and kitchen lights were all on. Both of my friends were giggling in the living room. I found this odd. We all went to bed after midnight. My first instinct was, are they investigating without me? I heard them both giggle again. I presumed they were doing fine without me, so I fell back asleep. It was around 8 a.m. or so. I was up in bed looking at my phone. One of my friends stepped into my bedroom and asked, "Did you hear anything last night?" I excitedly shared what I saw. Woke up at 3:20 a.m., lights all on, which I found super odd. Both were giggling. I assumed they were both investigating. I chose not to join in, and I fell back asleep. Her eyes grew wide, her face in shock. That's not what happened. Our other friend was harassed by the wife of the captain, likely first owners, in her sleep in the master bedroom. My other friend was sleeping on the couch. She heard mumbling from the master bedroom. She walked to the doorway of the master bedroom to see our other friend's leg straight out to the side, as if she was being pulled out of the bed. Our friend was screaming in her sleep. She immediately recited the Lord's Prayer. Our friend in bed shot up, awake, and gasped loudly. They both moved into the living room and sat in shock, quietly, on the couch for some time. They eventually fell asleep in the living room. They never turned on any of the lights. They never laughed. The Lady Spirit manipulated my environment to prevent me from helping. The Lady Spirit made it very clear we are not welcome. She also taught me that spirits can manipulate our environment or our minds to trick us. I have been to many haunted locations repeatedly with incredible experiences. However, this home was tops. I will never stay at this house again. I stayed in a haunted Airbnb in Grand Island, New York, just north of Buffalo, New York. It was a beautiful 2-story house with a wraparound porch built in 1905 on the Niagara River. I was staying there with my wife and her family for her grandmother's funeral, as most of her family lives in the Buffalo area. On our second day staying there, my wife and I are completely alone in the house, waiting for her cousin to come pick us up when we start hearing footsteps upstairs. I immediately recognize the noise as the sound of the footsteps from someone walking around, but my wife is initially trying to explain it away as old house noises. The footsteps continue with more purpose now, and they're gradually getting louder and more distinct to where my wife can't deny it anymore. I decide to get the balls to go upstairs to investigate and find absolutely nothing and no one. We both try to brush it off at this point when suddenly we hear what now sounds like somebody stomping around upstairs, followed by a door slam. Nope, we waited for her cousin outside after that. I had an experience at an Airbnb in Flagstaff, Arizona. It was just an average but nice house in a good neighborhood built in the 90s. The couple was so nice, and there was even a vibrating bed. I get clairvoyant images in my head at haunted places, and I got a flash of a woman at the door with red hair, but I just forgot about it. I dreamt that night of the woman, and she's talking about all the antiques in her room and how she made the quilt I was in. Real chatty, red hair, 1940s looking lady. Something about the trunk in there. I can't remember exactly the details now. At breakfast the next morning, I mentioned to the host that I dreamt about the room and a lady, and right away she says that's her dead grandma. We go into the room, and she pulls out photo albums, and it's, you guessed it, that same woman. She told me all about her. It was actually really sweet, and I felt comfortable enough to tell her what I had picked up on. And she believed me and told me that she had abilities too, which is why I think the whole thing happened in the first place. All three of us apparently have gifts with seeing the dead. The weird part, though, is I only bought the room because I had seen it before in an image in my head. So I knew something would happen in that house, and I was curious. I have this bizarre ability to know if a place is haunted just from looking at a picture. It never fails. I stayed at a castle/manor in France a decade or so ago with my girlfriend at the time. It was through this program, I want to say Workaway, where you can travel to different places and get hosted by people in exchange for work or help with their farm, business, hotel, whatever. One of the people we had met through the program had just purchased a castle in France. He needed someone to stay while a foreign crew came in and did renovations. The grounds consisted of a huge manor, a smaller guest house, some gardens, and a very, very old church. We started by staying in the guest house. Everything was fine during the day, but I would wake up at exactly the same time every night with this intense feeling of dread. I was absolutely certain that someone or something was about to walk into the room. I would wake up in a cold sweat, absolutely terrified. It didn't matter how much I drank or how much medication I took. Same time every single night. We eventually moved into the castle, thinking that would help. The exact same thing happened, wide awake at the same time, frozen in fear. I can remember thinking to myself, how am I going to react when this entity walks into this room? I never saw anything in the month that we stayed there. As soon as we left, I was back to normal. We even did some micro travels while we were at the castle. I would sleep perfectly fine anywhere, but on the grounds of that castle. I've actually never stayed in an Airbnb before. I always just get like a hotel. I never even think to get an Airbnb, but after reading some of these stories, I'm probably just gonna stick to hotels. Airbnbs are kind of scary because you don't know, like personally know the freaking owner. They could have cameras up, or they could be like hidden in the house somewhere. You never know. Let us know